Well, welcome to the Trinity Podcast. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Joel Milligan. I'll be your host for today. And we have Jeremiah Stanley, Daniel Riddick, and Tom Messer with us today, all pastors here at Trinity. And gentlemen, we're going to kick this off with a little question for you about overthinking. That's what this podcast is going to be about. And this hits home with me because I am a classic overthinker. That's just my makeup. That's my personality. You can ask my wife. I'm going to be thinking about whether or not that event has adequate parking for us hours before we get to the event, because I'm going to be thinking and making sure where I'm going to park. And anyways, that's just one small microcosm of the way my brain works. So I'm probably one of the worst overthinkers sitting at this table, but we'll find out. Daniel, we'll start with you. Would you categorize yourself as an overthinker?
Whatever you are, I'm the opposite of that. I'm
Yes,
not an overthinker. I'm sure there's many things in my life I should have thought more about. But no, that is not
Yeah, you don't want to be an underthinker.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Maybe a pendulum swing. But no, I don't think deeply. I probably, again, for better or for worse, I'm sure we'll get into the downsides of this. But I have the ability, I can quickly either compartmentalize and or just kind of turn the page real quick on a problem or a situation or whatever. And it drives my wife crazy because I'm ready to kind of resolve it, and then I'm like happy and good and ready to go. And sometimes she's not.
Yes.
So.
Pastor, how about you?
Yeah, well, I would tend to, I don't overthink things, but I understand how people can, rethink or toss in their mind, things that have happened in their life, and that can either be a good thing or it can be a negative. It just depends on how you let it affect you.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So there are thinkers and there are feelers, right? So I'm definitely more on the thinking side. In terms of overthinking, I can tend to focus on people more because I'm a relational type person. So I care about, I wonder how they process that or how they thought about that. I don't think I overthink it, but definitely that. But then in addition to that, I'm a big planner. So if there is a place I overthink, it's like thinking about goals and, I'm 43 and I'm like, man, I'm going to be 60 before long and I haven't accomplished these things I want to do. And so I can stress about I want to get these things done.
So would you say, are you ready, aim, fire, ready, aim, fire, ready, fire, aim?
Where probably closer to the firing before aiming. Yeah, that would be, I probably tend more toward that, but I do like.
Well, then that's probably where you rethink things because you probably think, man, I should have thought that through a little bit more, and then
perhaps
it's a second guess.
Yeah.
That's a good analogy. I'd probably say the same thing. I'm ready. I don't feel like I'm I don't think I'm reckless in decision making.
Right, I agree.
I think I'm ready, but then I'm fire, and I'm like, we'll tighten this thing up as we go.
Yeah,
let's get it going down the track.
I would be ready, aim, fire.
Yeah.
You
want to make sure you've got it.
Yeah, but that's what. So that doesn't mean I can process things afterwards because I want to evaluate and I can see the good and the bad. But I do my processing before. In other words, I'm ready to live with the consequences because I probably thought them all the way through.
I'm more in the scramble mode on the other side. I'm oh man, maybe I should have read that before I did that.
Yes, mine is more along the lines of processing after again and again as if I could change the decision that I made.
By the way, I think it's interesting, Jeremiah kind of referenced it. I actually feel like, I'm saying me, but maybe people in general behave differently around this overthinking idea as it relates to, if you kind of say there's plans, goals, objectives,
right?
And you either do or you don't, and then there's relationships.
Yes.
And some people are really thoughtful in their planning and reckless in their relationships. Some people could be reckless in their decision making. Yep. And then they'll stay up at night thinking about the conversation they had, and so I actually feel like this you can live this out not in every area of your life, but in
That's true.
There are many different aspects of life that you can be an overthinker. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. You want to get into my head, you text me something, but maybe don't be super clear about it. Or I'll text you something really long and you respond with like the letter K.
Yeah,
and I'm like, what do they mean by that? Does that mean they're upset that I sent? Anyways.
That is a whole nother thing of communicate non-personal communication.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
What are
very
they
true.
thinking? Why did they say that?
Well, I never try to read deeply into it because I know me. I'm going to give you the quickest, shortest answer.
Yes.
And if I don't think I can give you an answer that I have a sense you're not going to receive well, then I'm going to take the time to either call you or come see you and say, "Hey, let me walk you through this or talk."
So you're not intentionally keeping them in suspense. Yeah.
Right, because I know they're probably going to like I can be really, really direct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you want to see them in person, explain it.
But I know they can't handle the directness.
Yeah.
I actually had a great conversation last week with somebody. We were actually talking through. There was kind of some coaching stuff around conflict management, that kind of thing. And I was actually kind of articulating one of the struggles I have in managing, especially if it's a relational or even if it's organizational planning, but there's differences. People see things differently. Is if you were to ask me, and some of you guys have received these, so you get this, because I would prefer, if I had my choice, to respond in the best way that I could. I would want to type an email because I can feel like I like to articulate it's like I can send long emails because I really want to get it just right. The problem is when you're dealing with complicated issues, email is like one of the worst ways to reply to people.
That's funny. Yeah.
And so it's like what you really need to do is have a conversation. I'm like, what I really feel like I want to do is type out an email and send it to them. But then a lot of people, like you said, can't receive that.
Yeah, one of the words I looked up when I saw the topic, I just did a quick search, and the word that came up was rumination.
Oh,
and I was like, because I own cows, so I was thinking about they have a 4-chambered stomach, and you just sit there and you just dwell on it. That's
a good point.
I was like, that's a good way to think about that. You just can't get past it. Yeah.
There's actually been, I can think of a specific time where Pastor called me to talk through something because he probably knew a text message or an email, so he wanted to actually call and clarify, and it was actually really helpful for me
because he was right. He was right. You weren't worried.
He was right. He was like, "Hey, I wanted to call you because I wanted to explain." And I was like, "Thank you. Now I can sleep tonight." Well, I want to reference a Forbes article which says this: 73% of 25 to 35-year-olds admit to being overthinkers. So think about that: 73% of 25 to 35-year-olds. Only 52% of 45 to 55-year-olds struggle with chronic overthinking. So if we're honest, we all tend to sometimes have repetitive thoughts that hold us back. It's like that old saying, if you don't take control of your thoughts will take control of you. And one of the books I'm reading right now is a book called Soundtracks by John Acuff, The Surprising Solution to Overthinking. And he defines overthinking as when what you think gets in the way of what you want. So it's that idea of spending hours thinking through things, processing things. Maybe people have said things like, it's just all in your head, or you get lost in your thoughts. Or someone listening, someone may have said to you, you just get carried away by your thoughts. So what I would like to take just a few minutes to discuss with all of you is, what are some ways that someone who admittedly is an overthinker can recognize those self-sabotaging thoughts, reframe them, and maybe replace them with truth, with gospel truth, with what God thinks about us, and overcomes those thoughts that can hold us back?
So basically, this is a pastoral counseling session for you.
That's
Joel.
Exactly what it is. I'm the host, and I set it up perfectly. Listen, I told my wife we were recording a podcast on this. Here's all she said to me: make sure you listen. That's what I'm on the podcast.
Well, and for to kind of give a little glimpse into how sausage is made for people that are listening to the podcast. So Joel sends out an email, and it doesn't tell us what we're specific. It doesn't give us an outline, but it gives you content matter that you can download. And the first time I read through it, I'm like, I'm not really, it's like I'm not really sure where we're going to go with this, and then kind of read through it a little bit, and then try to think it through. And I actually think it's a very relevant subject and I don't mean to think it was never that, but as the more I thought about it, in 2 Corinthians 10, we're told to bring every thought into obedience to Christ, which is, really, it sounds almost impossible. It's not an idealistic thing. Right. But then when you learn over time that we are preaching to ourselves, and it's a question of whether we're preaching and reinforcing biblical truth, gospel narrative, or are we preaching and reinforcing cultural narratives? Mm-hmm. And our tendency is probably to go back and forth to whatever degree. We do both. And if you're preaching a cultural narrative to yourself, you're probably really beating yourself up. Or you are creating a false narrative of some kind. David in Psalm 42 and 43, which are great, again, counseling psalms, he said to his soul, "Why are you cast down?" Mm-hmm. He's having a conversation with himself. Yeah. Why are you cast down? Why are you disquieted within me? Why are you so troubled? And then he actually says to his soul, here's soul talk, right? Put your hope in God. Yeah. Right? Which means literally he was putting his hope and trust in anything else. So I think, it's learning how to listen to the voices that are going on in your head and how to have the right kind of gospel talk, preach the gospel to your own heart that becomes absolutely critical. And if you don't do that, you will never be able to bring all of your thoughts into obedience to Christ. You're going to be subject to what I think you described well is, are you a thinker or are you a feeler? Mm-hmm. Well, at some point you're going to go off because you don't have these thoughts under.
What would you
control.
say to the person who? So it's kind of like the old counseling adage of like, just stop it, right? Like, so like, just do it.
He likes that one.
My favorite. I tell people, this is not about what we're talking about. People come and I do love to help people but I'm like, hey, look, I'm not a great counselor, and I joke with them, and I'm like, I'm a conduit to counseling. I'm like, if you sit down with me, it's going to quickly get to, hey, just stop it.
So I actually literally do this. I tell people, I say, I'm gonna write my counseling down on I'm gonna put one word on a card and I'm gonna give it to you. I want you to remember this. And they look at me like they're going to get this really profound thing. And I write the word frozen on a piece of paper. And instantly, I said, "Do you know what that stands for?" And they go, "Yeah, the song Let It Go." I said, that's Let It Go. Just let it go.
But the pushback to, it can't be that simple, right? Like, it can't just be as simple as, well, just preach the gospel to yourself. Just tell yourself that.
Well, here's what
God's
that means. I think you're absolutely right, because I think it takes real skill to be able to do that and to understand how you apply it in your life. You have to be able to, it's like when we talk about the gospel, you can't adequately talk about the gospel without identifying the problem. And the problem is we're massively sinful and wicked, more than we could ever even begin to comprehend. It's too simplistic to say, oh, just preach the gospel to yourself. Well, if that in your mind is, hey, God loves you and everything's going to be okay, or just let it go, or stop it, or whatever pithy little advice that's valid, but you have to do that in the context of, like, why do you beat yourself up? Why is your soul cast down? What's the cause for that? And how is the gospel an antidote to the sinful patterns that you're grooving into your mind? Mm-hmm. And you keep digging these deep trenches, and it's preaching the gospel to yourself. You guys mentioned this before. It's not novel or new. That is the renewing of your mind. Right. That is saying, I have to break the patterns of bad thinking and bad behavior in my life.
And it's taking the focus off of, like, putting yourself in the middle. So you think the whole world, your whole existence, everybody that's in that world, and the things that are in that world, that it all revolves around you. And that's contrary to the gospel truth that says, no, all of this revolves around God, his sovereign plan. You're part of that, but you're not at the center of that. And that's a hard thing for us to get our mind around.
I feel like what's missing, and this has been, has been or is at times true in my own life, but one of the things I've actually been trying to work through this in some areas that are more relational probably than like planning and problem solving is when we get into situations that I know you were joking about overthinking, but it's like the reason why we're overthinking is likely because the situation's complicated.
Yeah.
And, it's not because we're crazy. It's because the situation matters or we care deeply about it or it really is confusing or complicated. And if you can put together or get somebody to help you, and this is what I've actually been working with somebody to help me through this a little bit and put together a really simple, not complicated, but, a framework for thinking, which is rooted. We're in a obviously spiritual Christian context here, which is rooted in the principles of the gospel, but then practical in ways that help me to take steps, to take action, to respond or not to respond. But just kind of a simple framework that actually, and sometimes that's all we need is the path to kind of set.
I feel like what you're saying is kind of in the middle. It's like, it's not just as simple as, well, just trust God.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
right,
that's true, but sometimes it's helpful to have a plan or some type of process or help, counseling, whatever, to give you the assistance that you need to move toward the truth that we're...
I give you 2 little anecdotes, this real fresh. One, some kids in our academy vandalized one of the bathrooms in the church auditorium. And
do I need to talk to my son about this?
No, no. You're overthinking. you're way overthinking. And my policy is that I don't get involved in academy issues until it goes through all the way to chain of command. So this family shows up at the church office and they're saying they need to see me and about academy issue, and so. Tony's real good. She's just gracious. Hey, he can't get involved into it. And they said, well, it's really not about it. He said, my son needs to apologize. So this poor middle school student, the parents handled this exquisitely. They couldn't have handled it better. So this kid comes into my office, literally his dad makes him come in by himself. And the kid is just, terrified. And I had no idea.
You found out.
I didn't know if he was going to sell me candy bars or I had no idea what he wanted to do. And he pulls out a piece of paper and he's written down this confession. And he is about as nervous and devastated. And my heart went out to the poor kid. I'm thinking, gosh, I'll pay for the bathroom. It doesn't matter. And then his dad steps in and I talked to dad a little bit, and then I turned to the kid and I said, let me tell you something. I said I want to help you and I want to reinforce you, make you feel better about everything. I said, but this is really good. Your dad is an awesome dad. This is hard. It's probably the hardest thing that you've had to do in your life up to this moment. And the kid's like total agreement. I said, but you're gonna look back at this. This will be one of the biggest character builder experiences you ever have, and it'll give you courage because you're not covering over what you did. You're not minimizing what you did. Yeah. You're not becoming a victim. You're not blaming anybody else. You're owning it. And what I want you to know from me is, you couldn't be more forgiven. There's no way this could be less. This is not an issue. If you need me to go defend you to anybody, I would defend you. You've resolved this. And, I could see his, that crushed little, however old the 6th or 7th grade boy is, and he got his humanity back. He got his dignity back. But he's humble at the same time. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to put this focus on how I handle. I'm really, really proud of the parents for the way that they did it.
Yeah.
But that is a microcosm of, you can kind of throw yourself down the toilet. I failed. I'm no good. I'm this forever. I'm defined by this. And the opposite is really true. If you learn how to preach the gospel to yourself, and
yeah,
so
you got to balance that truth
you
out
do.
with, so I'm always reminded of Matthew 6:34, where it talks about, it's the story of consider the lilies, that they don't spend time making their clothing and spinning the yarn, but they're clothed beautifully. And he's like, they're just going to be cut up in the mower and gone. And so if God can spend that much time considering and creating and giving them what they need, then let's not worry about the things that we can't control, or the things that we sit there and just dwell on. Let's leave those things to God, focus on what he's put in front of us, and at the end of the day, it's about him, his plan, what he's trying to accomplish, and many of the things they worry about don't even come true anyway.
And literally in that passage is take no thought.
Correct.
Don't even
for tomorrow.
Don't dwell on this. Don't torment your mind over it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
This is great. I'm taking notes, but I'll listen back to this. So there is a phrase that has been used a lot, especially with overthinking. It's this idea of borrowing trouble from tomorrow. And I've heard people use this phrase, don't borrow trouble. God hasn't given you what you're going to need tomorrow yet. He's only given you what you need today. Can we talk a little bit about that and what you all think about that idea of borrowing trouble from tomorrow? You kind of already started that discussion of trusting God with today. But how would not borrowing trouble and trusting that God's going to give you what you need when you need it, how could that help?
I've heard some really bad interpretations of that over the years, where people just live haphazardly because they're like, oh, God's got it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the answer.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that, to your point, that tends to highlight, I think naturally we prefer to live on the extremes, if for no other reason, because it can be easier to live in the extreme. One extreme would be, to borrow the trouble, the extreme would be anxiety and worry.
Right.
So I'm playing out every conceivable, usually terrible scenario that could happen tomorrow and the next day. And
Doomsday.
Yeah, it's a doomsday scenario, and I'm playing this out in my brain. That's the one extreme. But by the way, this is maybe not the right word. There's a comfort to that, because it's like I can control my thoughts about I can create scenarios.
Here's my list of all the
things that can happen.
Yeah.
The other side of that is what you just said, which is, okay, I'm not gonna take any thought for tomorrow. That's what Scripture says, and so I'm just gonna live haphazardly, and that's to kind of chuck out like half of Proverbs, and which talks about counsel and all these kinds of things, but it also easier to live because in the flesh, because it's like, hey, I'm not going to put any thought into this. There's no work involved, and whatever happens. I think the reality is the solution to this kind of not borrowing trouble, there's a discipline to it. And so much of the Christian experience is about the daily disciplines of what it looks like to follow God. And I think this is one of those things that we can plan, prepare, seek counsel, steward. Think about all these biblical concepts that bring up the idea of preparation, and we can still do that in a way that doesn't lead us to worry or anxiety or whatever. And that's a disciplined walk in the power of the Spirit. But I think that there's that, I don't want to say it's even the middle, it's the third way. It's it's not either or, it's actually above that. It's God's way, and it keeps us out of the ditches. It's easier to live in the ditch. That's just the bottom line.
Well, specifically, the scriptures call out anxiety multiple times. Philippians 4 talks about that. Don't be anxious, but through prayer and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known. So I think prayer is a great way to, like you said with David, I'm going to take these things to God. They're beyond my ability to solve them, or I don't have the resources. I don't have the ability to control it. So I'm going to go to him and cast my care on him.
I think a couple of things Joel would say is important from people listening into this. We've referred around them. The Psalm 42 and 43 passages are really important. Jeremiah just referred to Philippians 4. We've talked through Matthew 6, 19 through 34. All of those, if you process and digest it. The balance point, I think Daniel really touched on it, and I don't think the word disciplines should scare people. It's really the practice of the Christian life that does this. Is if you think about there's things you should legitimately process through planning. You should think through, right? And then there's other things you don't need to dwell on, right? And there's a balance point. Like I just had this conversation with Jacob. Family went up we were all together for a weekend, and a family wedding. My kids got to spend time with my parents. My dad's he's 100, so they really value that kind of time together. And I had a chance to take Jacob back to the airport earlier in the kids, and I was having a conversation that was very similar to conversations I've had with my other kids when they were his age, and that I have oftentimes with college age students or what I'd call that 18 to 24, 25-year-old. And, he's trying to think through, am I getting the right degree? Should I do something else? Is this a waste of time and money and all these things? And that is a very classic example. Like, I don't want to say to him, "Oh, don't ever worry about anything." You actually want to take things seriously, and the fact that you're being thought about is really a good thing. On the other hand, this is absolutely true. It's going to work out. If you obsess over details, what you're doing is you're minimizing the sovereignty of God and the fact that God is in control, and He's got a plan for your life. And whether you took this class or that class, it's not like God's up there and going, "Oh, great, that's it."
Don't
you
open
just
door
blew
two.
the whole thing. And I think we upset. That would be the point. I think there's the obsession. It's good to have plans. It's good to think through. It's good to process all that. But don't obsess over things. You got at some point you have to give this over to God, and you got to trust Him, and you got to say, "Hey."
Just a practical thing for me in my life is journaling. So I've journaled since I was in college. And it helps you see patterns, because you don't. Sometimes you don't think you're overthinking or overprocessing, but you go back and say, "Oh, I was worried about that same thing this time last month or last year." So that can be a good way to track. But then also, to your point, it can demonstrate, "Oh, I was worried about that. I don't even remember now. That was 2 months ago. God took care of it, and it's completely gone. And I spent so much time worrying about that, and yet God came through time after time."
I would say this would be. I don't want to confuse people by this, and I'm sensitive to know this nuance. But if you said, "Hey, God's going to give you permission to add anything into the Bible, just a verse into the Bible," I would probably say this is the verse I would add. It's going to work out. I don't know how. I think sometimes it works out in spite of me. I think lots of times it works out, but it's going to work out because God is in control. And over the years, I look back on all the things I worried about, they got worked out.
I think this is one of those conversations or topics like overthinking that it's a worthwhile exercise. And what you just said, Jeremiah, on the journaling is a case in point of this. This is one of those issues you can work through if you will spend a little bit of time doing some self-introspection or evaluation. And if we could kind of, even if it's a post-mortem, we're going to look back on a situation. So maybe it's difficult to do in the moment, in the heat of the moment, but we can look back. It's like if we could give ourselves the permission to, the Marvel movies, the Doctor Strange Marvel movies. I'm going to be terrible in the terminology here, but there's the thing where he kind of gets out of his body and he can see the scenario. It's like if we could give ourselves that permission, even if we're looking back, a lot of times it would help us identify the root causes of the problems. And so, we're worried about whatever circumstance. And if we could kind of be honest with ourselves, we're not actually worried about the situation. We're frustrated we can't control the situation.
Good point.
And then all of a sudden we realize, what the root cause of, and I'm creating a hypothetical here isn't really the problem that I'm facing. It's the fact that I'm out of control and I don't know what to do with that.
Things aren't going the way that I would have written the script or.
This is not my way. I'm not in control. And really we realize, man, so much of what's going on inside of us actually isn't the people or the circumstances around us. It's the fact that we are not equipped like we should be or could be to deal with the disappointment, to deal with the lack of, the control to deal with whatever the problem is in our life. And then if we could see that, now that's a problem that that actually is something you can work on and solve.
Right.
You can't control other people, but I can control, me and the way I think. And
I like your analogy of getting out of your body, the Marvel reference. Yeah. Very good. We'll land the plane there. Here's a question I want to finish this conversation with. How can you involve others in your journey to help you change your thought patterns, to help you from overthinking? If that's kind of a way to step out of the situation, someone listening.
That's where the local church comes in. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. It's like, that's what the people of God are there for, to be able to talk through and get counsel and advice and just be honest with, like, hey, I'm struggling with this. Yeah, can you help me? Hold me accountable.
I mean, not always, but oftentimes we're in our heads about stuff because we're not having the conversation with anybody else.
That's a great point.
And it could be really helpful for us to get out of our heads and into conversation
Dialogue.
with, somebody who we, is trustworthy, a pastor, church.
I can't really add more to that than just this, is that everything in the Christian life is healthier, richer, fuller, deeper if you do it in community with people. And the more problems, burdens, difficulties you own and hold to yourself, that just feeds into the overthinking, the over-processing, the anxiety. You need to have healthy people in your life that you can just, even if it's, hey, pray for me, or
it could be that simple.
Man, sometimes that release, saying whatever it is out loud.
Let it go.
Man,
let it go.
And somebody titled the podcast.
Let it go.
But that relationship is infinitely important. It is the essence of what Christianity is you don't do life alone.
That's a great place to stop. I'm encouraged by this conversation, gentlemen. Really, really good stuff today. I appreciate it. Hey, thank you so much for listening today. If you want to check out that book, it's Soundtracks by John Acuff. I encourage you to check it out. Great thoughts about how to overcome overthinking. And right here at Trinity, we want to help everyday people discover an extraordinary life with God. We'll catch you next time.